Welcome to this episode of Clinically Pressed. This one we got extremely lucky to have a chance to call in with Greg Nuckols of StrongerByScience.com. Greg is currently pursuing his master's degree in exercise physiology, but that has not stopped him from digging way deep into the science of everything and trying to really distill it down and actually deciding what is good versus what's just kind of fluff and what it all means. Very, very impressive guy when it comes to that. So if you've ever had questions or aren't sure on how to interpret science and science studies, this is going to be a great episode for you. This also comes from a guy that is a very high-level power lifter, which gives some more credence to what he does and how he trains people. So, great episode. We learned a ton. Makes me actually want to maybe read a statistics book to really understand everything, but definitely worth listening to. So, we hope you enjoy it. We'll see you on the next episode.
So I guess the first thing, obviously, you know who I am. I'm Andy. This is Joel Ludke. He's an athletic trainer, director of sports performance here at UWL. Kyle Boland, he's a chiropractor, his own practice. He's my chiropractor, and he's the best damn one on the planet. And then Andrew Jagum, PhD, obviously, in Lindenwood, former UWL professor and my undergrad professor.
Good deal. I'm Greg. Good to meet you guys.
Hello, Greg.
I have no real degrees to speak of or fancy titles, so I'm a little out of place here, but try to make it work.
I also don't have any fancy degrees or titles to my own yet.
Yeah, but you guys are really strong.
Yeah, strong. I think you win the beard.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got really good beard.
Yeah, we've got the two best beards on the call, so that's what really matters.
Put it on the CV.
So we were just kind of talking about what, because obviously this was kind of last second. Usually we'd have kind of prompts for you to go through and an idea of what we wanted to talk about. But with kind of your wealth of knowledge and then just us being an audience, we had ideas about possibly talking about the difficulties of science and application, but then also the difficulties of coming in with such a wealth of knowledge and such a wealth of practical experience to somewhere where people aren't always so entrenched in the literature and maybe have some outdated ideas, or you disagree with some of their stances and how you kind of go about that. And just your general experience with coming to academia for your master's degree, and with obviously just as much knowledge, I'd be willing to argue, as probably your advisors.
Sure, we can take a crack at that.
Don't say anything that'll get yourself in trouble, though. I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think about. No, it should be fine. It should be fine.
Who wants to bring it in?
From my perspective, just putting my professor hat on, that's one thing that I was wondering what your experience have been like. Coming from more of a non-traditional path, I guess, to academia, of what it's like having those prior experiences and that knowledge base to now kind of go back through the education process. Has it been easy? Are you learning a lot, or is it remedial for you, or just kind of how has that process been?
The hardest part, honestly, is just that I have so many irons in the fire. I don't know, like the other people in my cohort seem to be finding the program pretty difficult, but like from where I'm sitting, if I wasn't trying to like hold up my end of a marriage and run two businesses, like it would be a walk in the park. But add all of that other stuff on top of it, and I occasionally miss the feeling of my bed. A lot of short nights, a lot of stuff going on, but it is what it is. as far as the actual classes go, so I'm at UNC, and it's like a very, very research focused program. You know, R1 institution, everyone's trying to pump out a bunch of papers. And so I don't know how they would feel about this characterization, but this is kind of the consensus view of all of the master's students. The program very much seems to be set up such that the classes are very easy, just so you don't have to spend too much time like reading and studying, so you can spend more time in the lab doing research, which that was disappointing to me to some degree, especially the statistics class. I'm weird in that I really like stats, and I was hoping I'd get more out of my statistics class, but it was pretty remedial. And similar with XPhys, I didn't go into it thinking I'd get too much out of it, just because I've spent the last 4 years being out of school just reading about physiology all the time. But I was kind of hoping I'd pick up more from that class than I did. But it is what it is. I learned a lot in the lab methods class I took. And then I've just learned a lot hands-on actually doing research. And that was the biggest reason I went back to school in the first place. Just because, like, I mean, my 9 to 5 is varied, but the majority of it is reading research, writing about research. And I'm cognizant of the fact that really in all domains of life, there's a difference between like kind of academic knowledge of something and hands-on knowledge of something. You know, kind of the whole deal of like, you never trust a pencil neck strength coach all that much, because it's like, you've read about this in books, but how much deep understanding do you have of this topic? Because it's clear you haven't applied it too much to yourself.
Right.
And I kind of felt the same way about myself with science. I knew how it worked just kind of on a general level, but I was confident that there were like parts of that process I was missing just from having not actually gone through the process and done it myself. So yeah, I mainly went back to school for research experience, and I've gotten quite a bit of that. So overall, it's been rough just with how many balls I'm trying to keep in the air, but the actual experience of the program itself has been pretty solid overall.
Good. So would you almost recommend that path to other students? Do you think it's beneficial to get more real world experience, kind of figure out what you want to do, or how that practical side of it fits into the academic model, and then bring that back to the classroom? Or do you think the other way around is the ideal route?
I feel like there are pros and cons to both approaches. I think you're going to get more out of what you learn in the classroom if you already have kind of a decent understanding of how that stuff is applied in the field. At the same time, kind of on a practical level, going from being out in the world and working for a few years to transitioning to a TA stipend isn't the most fun thing. And there are a couple other people in my cohort who had a similar path. One person was out for a year. One person got their master's in marketing and worked for like 8 years, and then decided she didn't like marketing and wanted to go back to school for XPhys. And we're, like, I'm trying to keep my businesses running as well, but both of them are like, man, it sure was nice when I wasn't like living at 10% of the poverty line. So yeah, that's a practical drawback of, spending some time out of school before going back. But I do think having that practical experience on the front end does enrich the education process.
Yeah. Do you ever just look around at some of the other students in your class and be like, you guys just don't get it? Like, you just don't know what the real world's like, and almost get frustrated in that process? Because there's sometimes I just want to yell that at my undergrad students, but you guys don't realize how this is going to be used in your future endeavors. Like, and just they're not grasping how they're going to need it or how they're going to use it, outside of the classroom?
Sometimes. On the whole, though, I would say the other kids in my cohort are a pretty savvy bunch overall. So one of them took a year off, did some personal training, and now is going back to school. A lot of the other ones come from a strength sports background. So there's like 3 current or ex powerlifters in addition to me in the program, have spent some time under the bar and, if not spent time like formally coaching people, at least like, helping out friends who were on their powerlifting teams at their old schools. So I would say most of them actually do have at least like some degree of practical experience going in. The thing about their behavior that frustrates me the most is, again, going back to our just living on scraps TA stipend. Like, end of every month, they're complaining like, I have no money. This is terrible. I'm like, well, you go out to the bars 3 nights a week and run up $50 bar tabs. Like, of course you have no money. So, that's a real world skill that I feel like a lot of them haven't mastered. But in terms of being in a decent position to at least see how they're going to apply at least a decent amount of what they're learning in the classroom, I think they're a pretty savvy bunch overall.
Awesome.
What's been like, obviously there's a huge difference between kind of like we were talking about reading research and applying it to a writing scenario. What's been the biggest surprise for you? I don't know your research background if you did any in undergrad, but kind of getting into the lab for maybe the first time, or certainly for the first time as an in-depth type researcher, what's been the biggest surprise or lesson or takeaway that you've kind of gotten so far?
I'd say the biggest thing is I would say the biggest thing is just how hard it is to do research on human subjects.
They don't listen.
I've heard that's a challenge.
And I will say that I would say I probably read studies a lot more fairly and somewhat less critically now, because I see things where they could be improved, but then I'm like, yeah, I also totally get why you didn't do that, because that would be a huge pain in the ass.
Yeah, I think that was a huge takeaway for me too. Is you're taught to read critically, but you're not taught to read realistically until you do it yourself. And my first study that I ran at TCU had, I think it was a 63% attrition rate. Then after that point on, I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
That's why people do animal research.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just the logistical challenges that go into it. So last semester, we bit off way more than we could chew. There were 2 training studies going on, one of them with 89 subjects and the other one with 47 subjects, I think. And both of those studies involved leg pressing. And I think like peak concurrent enrollment was like 37 in one study and like 53 in the other. And we only had 1 leg press. And it quickly became obvious, like, oh shit, we need to buy a new leg press.
Yeah.
So, just kind of like basic logistical stuff like that, that if you're just reading a study and you don't know what else is going on in that lab at the time, like that would never occur to you.
Do you get more of an appreciation from even the experimental design standpoint when you look at it from a researcher's perspective instead of like a coach's perspective of, yeah, I know this isn't how it's traditionally done out in the field, but we need to control it. We need to do it this way first to identify, any mechanisms or whatever, and then look at how it can be applied in the weight room?
If I'm being honest, not really. Like, I think I had a pretty solid grasp of that coming in.
Gotcha.
I have more of just a curiosity question. Who's your primary advisor?
Claudio Battolini.
Okay.
Gotcha. So what, are you going on to the next level after you finish up your master's, or what are you planning on doing?
God, no. No, I thought I might want to coming in, but for me, like, just getting the experience doing research was the biggest thing I wanted to get out of it. I don't personally have any need for a PhD. Like, I don't know that I'd really get anything out of it because I'm not looking for an academic job. And it might make my blog look more legit, but I'm not willing to mortgage 4 years of my life for that. So yeah, probably not.
How did you get connected with some of the guys that you're collaborating with on some of your writing projects and stuff?
Social media mostly.
Yeah.
Either them reaching out to me saying, I stumbled across your blog, you seem less dumb than most bloggers, or me coming across their research and being like, hey, you're doing cool stuff, let's chat.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, mostly just like cold emails.
Do you have an idea of what your thesis is going to be yet?
I do. I have a very good idea. I'm going to be looking at the effects of sex and menstrual cycle phase on acute fatigue and recovery from resistance exercise.
Nice.
I'm really interested in the menstrual phase stuff, especially recovery, because there's at this point 3 papers looking at like menstrual cycle phase-based training, either loading more of the training into the follicular phase or luteal phase. And all 3 of them found positive effects for follicular phase-based training, but there's not hardly any good like mechanistic work looking into why that would be. If you look at the mechanistic stuff, there's an argument to be made that you would think a lot of it would be driven by estrogen because it's a pretty solid anti-inflammatory, seems to help with the recovery process from training, but average estrogen levels are higher in the luteal phase than the follicular phase, but all of those studies tend to indicate that follicular weighted training tends to be best. And there's only been 1 paper to this point looking at recovery during the menstrual phase. That was Markovsky 2014. And I want to say there aren't any papers looking at acute fatigability. At least with resistance exercise. There's a fair amount of like repeated sprint research looking at that, finding that women tend to be a little bit more fatigable in the luteal phase because their like body temp set point's a little bit higher due to the progesterone, so they don't thermoregulate quite as well, so they fatigue a little bit faster. But I don't think anyone's actually looked at that with resistance training. So I'm definitely interested in the male versus female comparison, but I think the more interesting and novel stuff is going to be the menstrual cycle stuff.
That'll certainly have some implications for birth control use and how that's used or not used, because that's a pretty common option for a lot of female athletes. Like at university level, I bet it's close to 50%. Usually when we screen for that are on birth control. So
I'm surprised it'd be that low.
Yeah, it very well could be higher too. That's just kind of a ballpark figure of what we've seen.
Just looking at like general population data I've seen, I think for typical college-aged females, it's something like 55-60%. And I'd assume it would be higher in athletes, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
And my experience, it was always they could get it paid for, especially at the Division I levels, if it would cause them distress in running or it was painful. So then the university would cover it because it was affecting their athletic ability.
Interesting.
So a lot of ours were on it,
Yeah.
for multiple reasons, I'm sure.
Kind of go the other side of that of females that are amenorrheic from excessive training or under eating or a coupling of both.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons I'm glad I'm going to be working with strength athletes, because we tend to not undereat, at least as much as like team sport athletes.
That's true.
Yeah.
Cool. So when are you starting that one up this year?
Yeah, working on the IRB over the next couple of weeks, and then going to get rolling, start a fall semester.
Okay.
So did you just finish your first year?
I did.
See, you better get going here.
I think I'm a little behind. I always wonder this when I talk to like people who are generally entrenched in science and literature. What would be your biggest advice to somebody who's just getting into that world as far as anything? So it could be how to approach reading a paper or interpreting a paper, anything like that.
This might just be my bias, but I would say get really comfortable with statistics, because I feel like everything else people generally pick up on. So more so for people going into like grad school and wanting to pursue science. In terms of just like kind of casual people just reading papers for fun, they're generally bad at all of it. But in terms of where just like talking either to people kind of at my level, at the master's level, or people who like have their PhDs and do science, like it seems like it's not uncommon to come across people who either don't have a great grasp of statistics or understand them but still don't feel confident with them. So that seems to be a pretty common blind spot, even though it's so important. Like, I mean, ultimately science comes down to being able to design a good experiment, being able to like actually execute the experiment well, and then be able to analyze it properly. Like it's a third of the process. And I find that a lot of people either just don't like it or aren't good at it. So yeah, kind of get ahead of the curve, figure out statistics. They're fun, they're useful.
With that being said, do you have a good resource for somebody who may need to get better at their stats?
Asking for a friend.
Other than reading stat books.
You know, I was gonna say read stat books. Like I feel like that's the biggest issue. Because like, you know, you're into physiology. Everyone reads papers. Like everyone reads. Stats class, even if the readings were assigned, like I would guess less than 5%. So yeah, like if you're not mathematically inclined, it's probably not going to be fun. Like they're good. Just kind of work your way through a basic stats book, and then past that, probably the kind of supplemental stats resource I like the most is there's a psychology statistics blog called Data Colada. The main guy who writes that is Yuri Simonson. He's really, really bright, and I find he writes about statistics on a pretty accessible level. So once you get a pretty decent grasp of basic statistics, you'll probably enjoy reading that site.
It's something I've always wanted to learn stats, because I feel like even just reading, you can't truly interpret a paper if you're not sure that the stats are concrete. You kind of have to take it at face value for what they're saying if you can't diagnose a stats issue. So I wanted to learn stats, but our program has one stats class, and it's in your third semester. And I feel like having more than one would be ideal, and then possibly earlier, because I don't know how you're supposed to gather knowledge if you can't properly interpret.
I mean, I feel like even if you just know the basic stuff, you're ahead of a lot of the people in our field, though. Like two really big basic errors that I see a lot are people running ANOVAs and looking and saying like one group had a significant main effect and the other group didn't. Therefore, group A did better than group B. They never tested for an interaction. Probably because that doesn't come built into SPSS.
Yeah.
SPSS is absolute garbage. But so people do that a lot, and that's not correct. And another thing I see a lot, more so in kind of like the sports science realm than like the XPhys realm, is people just calculating effect sizes and being like, oh, this effect size is bigger than that effect size, therefore something good happened. It's like, that's not how it works at all, man. And like they're comparing like within group effect sizes, not even calculating a between group effect size. And like, that's just laziness.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's not people being intentionally misleading. I feel like they probably just don't know better. But like those two things, like that's very basic stuff. And I feel like a lot of people in our field don't even have like that level of stuff down.
Well, and kind of going back to what you said about your experience with your current stats class, that was kind of similar to me. Throughout my grad school career, I hardly learned a thing in the stats classes I took. Even at the PhD level, we were outsourced into the engineering program. So we took statistics with all the doctoral level engineering students, and the type of analysis that they do, all the examples just didn't apply to any of the work that we were doing with human-based research. So we were forced to learn kind of on our own through learning just by doing, what our mentor is having us do and the type of stats that we ran within our lab, and then just through years of experience and just reading more and interpreting more. So it was almost like I didn't quite get it in the classroom, so I was just forced to look elsewhere to pick up on what I needed.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common, which is really unfortunate. Like,
it is.
That should be a class that departments take seriously.
I think it brings up a good point, though, with something I've learned since, well, even during my undergrad, because no comment.
We have the same stats professor.
And coming to grad school now and kind of being on your own, I think it's important for people who are looking to get into this type of work, research or academia, whatever it might be, to take your education into your own hands. And like you said, we were forced to learn other ways. But a lot of other people that I've met, just if I'm not going to be taught, I'm not going to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to take your destiny essentially into your own hands and read textbooks, even though I don't want to read a stats book. I guess while you were talking, I was thinking about, I read physiology textbooks all the time. What's the difference? Just another part of the craft. But just overall, doing what it takes to further your education. Even if you look at it in a selfish way, if you're not just interested in it for the scientific approach, if you're good at stats, it makes you a hell of a lot more marketable.
Yeah.
Because like you said, most people aren't.
Well, and not just more marketable. Like I feel like not just knowing what stats to run on a data set, but like getting comfortable enough with stats that it kind of becomes a default way of thinking. I feel like that just helps your general decision-making process. It helps you view decisions more probabilistically and less like just black and white. Like just getting in it enough that you just...
I don't like this.
But that also might just be me. Like, I love numbers. Like the biggest complaint I have about humans is they're not numbers. Like,
sorry to disappoint.
It's fine. It's a relatively trivial issue, but one I run into a lot.
What scale are you using to interpret that?
Do what?
What scale are you using to interpret the relatively trivial issue? Did you run analyses?
I mean, I'm definitely dealing with a D less than 0.2 here, but greater than 0.
Okay. It was actually it's funny you bring up the human problem. We had to propose like a fake project, and I ended up just based on the design I wanted to do, the theoretical project. We had to look into like our fake rat research, and just the thought of working with like mice is so much more appealing than recruiting 80 people study.
I don't know that I could. I don't know that I could ever do rodent research. I wouldn't want to kill the little guys.
Yeah, that part's tough.
It's respectable.
Yeah.
But they listen. They're there when you need them.
12-hour light dark cycle.
Yeah.
They're the perfect research if you don't mind the limited application of what you actually care about.
All right.
You know, honestly, like that's a really good point. And one of my pet peeves is when people talk about RCTs and they're like, RCTs are great. They're the gold standard. You can use them to infer causality. No, you can't. Like you can if, like, the logic of that is if you manipulate one variable and you get different outcomes, you know that the variable you manipulated is what led to those different outcomes. But like, there are so many uncontrolled variables in human research. Like, I feel like you can get to like maybe pseudo causality, but like you can never establish causality.
Yeah. I mean, even if you think about it, just the nature of a normal distribution, there's always going to be an outlier. And probability wise, you could have a lot of outliers in one specific study.
Mm-hmm.
And so even with rat research or mice research, yeah, you're likely looking at causality there because you're kind of controlling it to the best of our ability to control a design, everything. But even then,
even down to the fact that all of the mice are incredibly genetically similar.
Yeah,
exactly.
But even then, I mean, it shows the importance of multiple studies. You could just get a weird, funky result based on, even if it's just maybe the thermostat mishap. You had a mishap with the temperature in the lab one day, and so your results turned out funky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest pet peeves, people citing one study as the end-all, be-all.
Yep. Or not understanding statistics and incorrectly interpreting their findings and cherry picking some of the data and blasting it all over social media or something.
Cherry picking is the one thing sport on social media.
One issue that we've had with human research, I don't know if you guys are struggling with this, is being able to adapt to some of the younger generations and how they are accessible. So it used to be you could do a lot of things via paper or call them or email them to remind them to show up for testing or eat this, don't eat that, or whatever. And now the response rates to those means are just spiraling downhill. So now we're having to get more almost tech savvy and, you know, Snapchatting them or texting them. And some of our compliance logs now, we're going to propose that we use Instagram to monitor compliance. So we're going to have them set up a fake account and they're going to hashtag what they were doing. Hashtag, you know, post a picture of them taking a supplement with the hashtag so that we can follow the hashtag and then we can see them, you know, be more compliant on a daily basis. So we're trying to have to adapt our data collection and compliance techniques to just the changing times and how people use technology.
Huh. That's nifty. We use a lot of text messaging. Man, that study I told you last semester with 89 subjects, the person who was shafted with scheduling all of those and like making sure that they actually showed up to all of their sessions, like, God bless her. That was a horrendous job. She was just like texting 18-year-old kids all day saying like, come to the lab, you have a session.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely not just like purely relying on email.
No, we hardly get anyone to respond to an email anymore or read it for their pre-test instructions and stuff. So we hardly even do it that way anymore.
It's kind of frustrating because before grad school, I got pretty big into like texting people. And then when you get more entrenched into more of the academia, you're taught emails are the appropriate form of communication. And then you start running research and you have to text a bunch of kids and none of them listen.
Now you're going backwards.
Yeah, man. And they have to email for other classes, right? Like, isn't that a thing? Like, don't they have to check email?
I would think so, but I don't know.
I had a kid, this is kind of unrelated to research, but I had a kid in one of my classes and he ended up not turning in his final assignments. So I'm I try not to fail anyone for like my activity courses because it's an activity course. So I send them an email. I send everyone who's going to fail. I'm like, hey, why'd you miss so much class, or why didn't you turn in your assignments, whatever. And like everyone except for one kid replied. And this one kid, 2 weeks later, emailed me saying, hey, I just got this email. Like, okay, grades were due 2 weeks ago, man.
Whoops.
Yeah, I had a kid this semester who, like 3 or 4 weeks into the class, just stopped showing up, which is fine. I assumed he dropped it. Checked my class roster like a week later, realized that he was still on my class roster. So I emailed him and said, like, hey, dude, you either need to start coming to class like ASAP, or you need to make sure you drop the class before like your period for dropping classes ends. Never get an email back. Email him again like a week later. Again, don't get an email back. And like, I obviously don't have this kid's phone number. I bumped into him on campus one day, and this was like after the drop ad period had ended. And I was like, dude, what's going on? Like, you need to talk to your advisor like ASAP to see if you can get some sort of special exception to drop this class, because otherwise, like, you have an F and there's nothing I can do about it. And he's like, why didn't you tell me? I'm like, I did. I emailed you like 4 times. And he's like, oh, I don't check email. And I'm like, well, not checking email just earned you an F, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's like, come on, man. This is college. Check your dang email.
I feel like you should have known that anyways. It's not your responsibility to babysit everybody out.
Yeah, but it's these days.
How'd your activity course react to your, what was it, 605 pause squat?
Oh man. They were very surprised. So I talked to, so UNC has lifetime fitness classes, which are like required to graduate. So most people who sign up for those classes aren't like incredibly motivated. And then there's physical activity classes, which are like elective classes. And so the kids in my PHYA class, like a lot of them were members of like UNC's powerlifting club. So they knew who I, like they knew who I was. And they were like bugging me the whole time, like the whole semester, like lift something heavy, lift something heavy. And I'm like, no, I'm the instructor of this course. You guys are lifting. I'm instructing you how to lift. That's how this works. The kids in my other classes had literally no idea who I was, which is good. That's the way I wanted it. So yeah, the last day I was like, hey, do you guys want to see me lift something? And they were like, yes. And this is while I was taking attendance. And I'm like, okay, to you, go start loading up a squat bar. And they're like, what do you want? Like 225? I'm like, yeah, we'll start at 405. And they were like, like just eyes bugging out. And then they were like, do you like do this competitively? And I was like, yeah, you can Google me.
That gave me an idea for, I never tell anyone my background. Some people just know because they've either looked me up or seen it while I lift the racket the random times I do. That gave me an idea for next semester. I should just load up a bar and
they can bet their grade on it.
Yeah, there you go. All right, if you want to pass this class, I haven't lifted in a while, but if you can out squat me, I'll give you an A.
There you go.
Just tell them if they can out total your squat.
Yeah, there you go.
So what's next for you after school then?
I have some plans, but I don't know the degree to which I am at liberty to talk about them. So like everything I'm currently doing, I'm going to keep doing. A lot of things regarding the business I've kind of kept on hold for a while because I knew I was going to go back to school. And I didn't want even more balls in the air when I went back. So going to expand coaching quite a bit. We have some plans for the research review mass that would be time consuming to some degree, so we haven't implemented them yet. And then there is one big secret plan that I should be able to talk about in like 2 months or so, but probably shouldn't yet.
All right, so I'll message you in 2 months.
We'll keep an eye out for it then.
Okay.
Well, that sounds good.
You want to ask the clinically pressed question?
We don't have to get on a number of them. So,
You got any questions for us or anything? Anything else you want to chat about?
What is your advice to me to make the whole thesis project process run as smoothly as possible?
Ooh. Have you picked your committee yet?
I have.
Okay. I think the best advice is the more organized you are up front, the better. So having assistants lined up, having people's time allocated to exactly what they're going to be tasked to follow, and then the more instructions that you can have for participants and ways to monitor compliance, collect and organize your data as you're getting it. Again, just the more organized and prepared you can be before you start, I think the easier it'll go, so that everyone knows exactly what they're doing once you hit that go button, so that you're not making extra work for yourself, or you didn't, I mean, you're going to know this already, but you didn't enter the data incorrectly in Excel and now you got to rearrange it and all those different kinds of things. So just the more organized you can be up front, I think the better, and the more smoothly things will run.
Cool.
Well, that's probably the best advice I got for a thesis standpoint. And then the other one would have been choose your committee wisely. But you already got that lined up. Who else you working with there at UNC?
So Dr. B is my advisor, Dr. Battolini. And then the other two on my committee are Eric Hansen and Tony Hackney.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Do you guys get to do any kind of like research rotations or hop around to different labs or work with different PIs there at all?
To some degree. If I'm being completely frank, not as much as was advertised when I interviewed, but it is what it is. I get it, logistics and such. I did have a chance to do some biomechanics stuff this so the people in my cohort who want to go into coaching mostly just like found like gyms to intern at. Couple people who want to go the physical therapy route after found like physical therapy clinics to intern at. And then the people who want to go the research route mostly just like pick another lab within the department to not really intern with, but just like be a research assistant for.
Mm-hmm.
So I did get some biomechanics experience this semester. That was fun.
Good. Another area that gets, under the radar sometimes is not a lot of people or places, I guess, have a good biomechanics person or classes and stuff. I feel like that gets placed as an afterthought through a lot of programs, unfortunately, especially in applied biomechanics.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, you got any other
I'm trying to
questions?
think. I don't think so.
Well, again, thanks for taking the time to chat with us here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Sorry, it was a little scattered, but I think it was a good conversation.
Yeah.
What's the name of your podcast?
Clinically Pressed is the name of it.
Do what?
Clinically Pressed.
Cool.
So we'll
I'll message it to you on Facebook.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, good luck with the thesis here as that kicks off. That's I wish it was I could say it's going to be easy, but they're always challenging for all kinds of different reasons. But
Man, as long as I can get people recruited, I think I'll be good. It should be a very manageable project, like just from a time perspective. Yeah. And I cleared out enough of my schedule this semester, so I'm not gonna. The only other class I'm taking is an independent study, which is a stats independent study because I'm a loser. Actually, no. So I'm actually pretty excited about this. This is my proselytizing for the day. Have you guys heard about P curves?
I have.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. You guys are like the first people I've ever talked to in semi-real life who have actually heard of pitfalls. So like no one has ever actually like applied that to any niche of our field whatsoever. A lot in psychology, some in biomedicine. Most people in exercise science, exercise, sports science have never even heard of them. And so, yeah, I'm wondering just kind of how much of the stuff in our field is junk. Just how much is actually reliable and how much is just like predicated on publication bias. And I know that when I read a lot of papers, I see a lot of p-values that are like 0.048 or something. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that shakes down.
That'll be,
But yeah, so independent study, not teaching next semester, going to be able to devote like 98% of my days to research. And it should be a pretty manageable project. So as long as I can find enough people, and specifically women, who will ascend to my project, it should be hopefully fairly chill. But we'll see.
Well, there's definitely a need for that kind of study. I know you'll make Lyle McDonald happen. He'll probably be all over that research.
Oh, that's another bag of worms.
I'm sure. All right. Well, thank you. You have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Clinically Pressed. Go to clinicallypressed.com for full show notes and links to everything that was covered in this episode. While you're there, you have access to all of our episodes, insights, and shorts. You can find Clinically Pressed on YouTube and any podcast outlet. If you could give us a rating, thumbs up, or review on how we are doing, we would greatly appreciate it. To get more free content delivered to your inbox, sign up for the Total Athletic Therapy newsletter. You'll get direct links to all new Clinically Pressed episodes, reviews on some of the latest research in health and performance, and links to related podcasts and other items meant to help you make the complicated simple and optimize performance. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.